Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're putting on our campaign strategist hats for a clinical, tactical postmortem of one of the most explosive and ultimately disastrous political runs in recent memory. We're talking about Graham Plattner's 2026 U.S. Senate campaign in Maine. We are going to look way past the headlines and dive directly into the political architecture of this campaign, examining exactly how a highly effective populist movement was engineered, built, and then totally dismantled.
Okay, let's dive into this and deconstruct the architecture of this campaign step by step. First, the candidate archetype. Second, crafting the populist message. Third, momentum and coalition building. Fourth, navigating opposition research. And finally, severe crisis management.
All right, Section 1, the candidate archetype.
Now, in modern politics, you got to remember, a candidate is rarely just a person, right? They're a carefully constructed persona, and this brilliantly illustrates that point. First, we have the reality of Graham Plattner's affluent roots, prep school, famous modernist architect grandfather. But, that doesn't exactly win a populist election. So the campaign literally engineered this rugged outsider identity, a combat Marine, a working-class oyster farmer. It was an absolute masterclass in weaponizing relatable traits while quietly bearing the privilege.
So from a tactical perspective, Plattner's biography functioned as the ultimate wedge issue. He was a disillusioned veteran who survived 3 combat tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. This let his campaign drive a massive wedge right through traditional party lines. Because think about it, when he criticized military spending or the establishment, it wasn't coming from some suit in Washington. It was coming from a grunt who had actually been on the ground. This veteran status, it was absolute armor. It totally shielded him from standard partisan attacks and gave his anti-establishment rhetoric this incredible, undeniable authenticity.
Moving right along to Section 2, crafting the populist message.
Once the archetype was locked in, they needed a message. And effective populism, it always relies on identifying a very clear enemy. Just listen to this from his viral 2025 launch video. I'm not afraid to name an enemy. And the enemy is the oligarchy. It's the billionaires who pay for it and the politicians who sell us out. Strategically, this framing is phenomenal. By defining the enemy as billionaires and corrupt politicians, the campaign totally sidestepped the usual Democrat versus Republican boxing match, uniting a cross-partisan working class against one common elite.
And this specific messaging choice? Incredibly cunning. Plattner explicitly rejected labels like liberal or progressive, which, let's face it, can be pretty toxic in rural, conservative-leaning areas. Instead, he branded himself a New Deal Democrat. This was a highly calculated move, guys. It maintained his cross-aisle appeal in a state like Maine, sending a clear signal that his focus was strictly on tangible, working-class economic support, completely ignoring modern cultural divides.
So what did this platform actually look like mechanically? Well, the levers they pulled were aggressively left-wing. Medicare for all, a 5% wealth tax on billionaires, strengthening labor unions, fixing housing affordability, and taking a hard anti-war stance regarding the Gaza and Iran conflicts. But here's the absolute genius of the campaign's strategy. Because these highly progressive economic policies were being delivered by a rugged, gun-owning, oyster-farming combat veteran, they bypassed all the standard partisan filters. Voters who might normally just tune out these policies actually listened, simply because the messenger didn't look or sound like a traditional progressive.
Okay, Section 3, momentum and coalition building.
This is where the campaign literally went into hyperdrive. Let's walk through this timeline, because it shows an unbelievable feat of political engineering. August 19, 2025, they launch a highly produced viral video. Just 9 days later, they hit $1 million in fundraising. By August 30, Senator Bernie Sanders is holding massive arena rallies for him. And this rapid, explosive assembly of grassroots momentum and union backing, it culminated in a record-breaking primary win by June 2026. They manufactured national attention at an unprecedented speed.
Now, what's really interesting about this metric is the sheer velocity of that capital. Raising $1 million in 9 days for a previously unknown political novice, that sent absolute shockwaves through the establishment. In the campaign strategist world, early money is rocket fuel. It instantly forces national donors and major media networks to take you seriously as a viable contender. And all that early momentum translated into cold, hard votes. Plattner didn't just win the June Democratic primary, he absolutely dominated it with a staggering 72% victory margin. He secured over 150,000 votes. To put that into perspective, that set a state record that exceeded Sarah Gideon's massive 2020 run by 40,000 votes.
This overwhelming surge actually forced the sitting governor to suspend her own campaign entirely. Tactically speaking, it was a flawless, hostile takeover of a state party apparatus.
All right, things take a turn here. Section 4, Navigating Opposition Research. Now, as we know, no campaign is flawless under the hood. Early on, the operation faced severe stress tests from the inevitable Oppo research dumps. First, journalists dug up old, extremist Reddit posts where Plattner called himself a communist and referenced armed resistance. The campaign deployed a very standard crisis tactic here: apologize and reframe, specifically citing his well-documented struggles with PTSD. Next, scrutiny fell on a Nazi-era SS Totenkopf tattoo on his chest. Plattner claimed he got it on military leave in Croatia, was completely ignorant of its history, and then covered it up. Then came rumors of rampant sexting outside his marriage. The campaign minimized this one, really leaning on his wife's statement that they had resolved it quietly through internal marriage counseling. Through sheer momentum and that veteran armor we talked about earlier, the operation managed these early controversies as survivable bumps in the road.
So the crucial point here is that beneath that roaring public momentum, structural cracks were already forming. Back in October 2025, long before the primary, the campaign manager, the finance director, and the political director all suddenly resigned. And get this, the political director walked away and explicitly refused a $15,000 non-disclosure agreement. Let me tell you, if a senior staffer refuses a $15,000 check just to stay quiet, that is a glaring, blinking red flag that the internal culture is toxic and deeply compromised.
Which brings us to Section 5, Severe Crisis Management.
This is where the campaign's crisis management framework just entirely shattered. On July 6, 2026, literally just a week before the deadline for candidates to withdraw from the ballot, a former girlfriend, Jenny Rassicot, publicly accused Plattner of sexual assault. This came on the heels of earlier, separate allegations regarding physical abuse from another former partner. Now, Plattner vehemently denied the allegations, framing them as a coordinated political hit job designed to derail his working-class movement. But, strictly from a clinical campaign perspective, an allegation of this severity is a fatal structural blow.
Let's see how this builds, because this is what total institutional collapse looks like. Building a coalition takes months, losing it takes hours. Immediately following the allegations, high-profile political support just hemorrhaged. Representatives like Rocana and senators like Ruben Gallego rescinded their endorsements. The main Democratic Party formally demanded he suspend his campaign. The very infrastructure that legitimized his outsider run completely abandoned him in a matter of hours.
But the absolute death knell was this statement right here. The Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, led by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and Chuck Schumer, stated point-blank that they would pull all funding and not invest a single dollar in the race as long as Plattner was on the ballot. And look, regardless of a candidate's personal defiance or grassroots energy, losing top-level institutional funding and explicit party backing functionally starves a campaign to death. Without that war chest, running a viable statewide race against a well-funded incumbent is just impossible.
So, we've seen how meticulously this populist strategy was constructed and then how quickly it imploded under the weight of its candidates' liabilities. But it leaves us with a truly provocative strategic question. Graham Plattner tapped into a massive, undeniable vein of working-class frustration. He proved that this specific blend of economic progressivism and rugged outsider aesthetics can win huge numbers of voters. So what does this all mean? When a highly effective platform succeeds but the candidate fatally fails, what happens to those 150,000 energized voters they leave behind? Who captures that momentum next? It's something literally every campaign strategist in the country is trying to figure out right now. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer, and keep questioning the playbook.